All right, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started. I'm used to starting on time. It's a QA in me. So good afternoon. So I'm Maurizio. I'm the consultant in this story that you're about to hear. This is Paul Ryan.
I'm Paul Ryan.
He's the CTO in the story you're about to hear.
I'm the CTO in the story you're about to hear. Now I'm leaving the stage.
All right, so we're going to talk about rebooting an organization in 100 days. And it's rebooting an agile organization. So I'm going to start the story by asking a question of people in the room. How many people in the room feel that your current agile deployment is just not firing on all cylinders? Or, you're just not getting what you expect? Show of hands. Good, about half of the room. Half to 3/4, which is about the same number of people we got when we presented this in Barcelona 2 months ago. So it's interesting that the trend out there seems to be that almost 1 in 2 or 3 out of 4 companies out there are not liking what they're seeing with Agile. So that's what this whole talk is all about. And as I'm out there looking at different companies, working with different companies, I see common signs that you need a reboot. So I'm going to share with you the 3 most common signs that you need a reboot and see if you see yourself inside of these signs that you see out there. All right? So sign number 1, you have 3 to 4 times more priority projects to deliver than you have actual capacity. So in the case of OpenX, who is the topic of this conversation, and Paul will tell you about it in a little bit, OpenX had 43 priority 1 projects, not to mention the priority 2, priority 3, priority 4, but they only had 22 teams to deliver it. So if you're in an organization that seems to have that kind of a balance, that's a sign. Next one. The teams are still early in their agile journey, right? They're still figuring things out, but you seem to have the same, everyone seems to have their own flavor of agile already going on. They haven't figured out the basics yet, but they're already trying their own things. So that's sign number 2. Sign number 3, you have what's called featureitis, or as Paul likes to call it, small ball. So what's featureitis? So featureitis is where you have teams that are delivering features every sprint on a release cadence, right? Maybe every 2 weeks on a release train. But these features are not tied to some bigger overall vision of a product inside of your organization. They're just delivering features to deliver feature. So we like to call that featureitis. So these are the 3 most common signs. So if you see those in your organization, chances are you need some type of a reboot. We do have a couple of bonus signs for you. So bonus sign number 1, you have already deployed Agile at least 3 times in your organization. And you see it in your organization because you see the planning poker decks on everybody's desk, but they're all collecting dust. You see the Agile training manuals collecting dust on everybody's desk. And people have just pretty much given up. They're saying, Agile, it just doesn't work. And they're being very vocal about it in your organization, right? So if you're seeing these kinds of signs in your organization, it means you need a reboot. And for OpenX, who we're talking about today, we saw these signs when we went in to do an assessment, and we saw these signs with various teams at various levels. But one thing we did see at OpenX, which was interesting, was that everyone was busy at OpenX. Like everyone was working on many, many projects. Everyone was very busy. And it seemed like they were being productive, but again, they weren't delivering to some bigger vision. So that's what we were seeing inside of this one organization. And really what was happening with the teams was they were busy playing Agile rather than being Agile. Now what's the difference between the 2? So playing Agile, you all have your boards, to do, in progress done. People are doing the ceremonies. So they're going through the actions. So that's where you're playing Agile. But being Agile is a whole different level. It really gets down to the culture of the organization. And has the culture of the organization really changed? Does the whole organization understand Agile? Do your leaders understand Agile from the top to the bottom? Right? That's where you actually change the organization's culture. That's being Agile. And that's where you get the biggest benefit. All right? So that's a little bit where we were with OpenX. And so Paul, at the time, called us in to do an assessment, and he felt he needed a reboot. And so I'm going to hand it to Paul to tell you what the 5 steps to kickstarting your reboot are.
Thank you, Maurizio. So before I jump into the 5 steps, let's talk a little bit about what OpenX is. It's an ad exchange. So an ad exchange helps publishers, websites, mobile applications get top dollar for their ad space. We basically run an auction for them by soliciting all of the potential advertisers, or frankly proxies for advertisers, that would want to bid on that space. And it's all in real time. It's a real-time auction. Okay, so an ad request would come in from, let's say, the New York Times. We might solicit 100 or 200 different, they're called DSPs, demand-side platforms. We might get 20 or 30 bids on that. We run an auction, and then we send the winner as the ad creative up to the New York Times, and then they display it. So OpenX is around 10 years old, so not really a startup anymore. And it's working at what I would call web scale. So we get around 100 billion ad requests a day. Okay, that turns into around 3 trillion events that we track. We get the ad request, we might throw it away because it's not a high quality ad request. We solicit all these different demand side partners and get bid responses. So this is a very, very high volume platform. We're in 5 co-location facilities worldwide. It's all on-premises stuff. We own around 20,000 servers. And it's kind of this big engine that keeps running. Now the platform itself is kind of big. It's around 12 million lines of code, okay, and it's all custom, right? Because you don't go to Microsoft to get your ad exchange software, especially at these volumes, okay. So that's kind of what OpenX does. Some of our competitors are people like, let's say, Google. It's not quite clear anyone's really a competitor for Google, but Google has their own equivalent, and it's called AdX. In Toronto, there's a company called the Index Exchange, which is another competitor. So this is, there's Google at the top of the heap, and then there's lots of other ad exchanges like OpenX that offer different things for the demand side as well as the publishers. So that's who we are. So let's talk a little bit about what are the things you really need to do to get a transformation going. You need buy-in from the top. Okay, so I'm the CTO, obviously I report to the CEO. If the executive team doesn't really understand what Agile is, the benefits, and why you would do it, all the misconceptions about Agile will prevent you from achieving success. Anyone want to guess what's the #1 executive misconception of Agile? It's like a deterministic process. Hey, we're going to Agile, and that means I'm going to release all this capability on this date. Right? That sounds like waterfall, doesn't it? Right? And so Agile, the process of Agile is you want to deal with a rapidly changing environment. It has little to do with determinism. It has a lot to do with being able to react and seize market opportunities. And that misconception, I've seen it, for the past 10 years, and it's definitely kind of at OpenX. Agile, also people think Agile means, hey, you just kind of do what you want and you work together and you kind of launch code. As we all know, Agile requires more discipline, right? There are ceremonies. You have to write stories. Stories have a format, right? That's more discipline, not less discipline. But everyone thinks Agile is a less discipline sort of thing. Agile means throughput, not predictability. So when I deal with that, this is kind of, I want to highlight that because that's kind of the one thing you say, hey, we did this Agile transformation and we're still not meeting our deadlines. I'm like, well, where do those deadlines come from? Do they come from the teams? Do they come from the product owners? Do they come from the release schedule? Oh, no, the CMO wants to launch on this date, right? Misconception, it's a bottom-up process, not a top-down process. Second thing, when you're doing a transformation like this, you have to have clear goals, okay? And the goals can be thought of as, what do you want to do with products in the marketplace? How do you want to change how we do product development and how do we want the team to feel? So if you're going to work on anything, it should have high impact in the marketplace that you're working in. We shouldn't just be busy and active. The activities should lead to new revenue streams and new margin. That seems really simple, doesn't it? But people like to just be busy, right? And say, oh, it's too hard to figure out what this product is going to do in the marketplace. Let's just launch and see. Now that can work great if you're rapidly iterating on stuff. But if that's a year-long project, that's a huge mistake. You have no idea what it's going to do, and you've spent a year not learning from the marketplace. Second thing, this gets to the year-long project mentality. What's the MVP that we can get into the marketplace really quickly, and then iterate, and then iterate, and then change it, and then capture a market opportunity? Or frankly, just drop it. It's okay to fail in print projects if you fail fast, or in product features. So the business should change its mentality from this kind of big bang, we're going to get a huge impact, to more of the MVP, kind of leanish MVP sort of approach. The other thing that's interesting here is if you notice, there are a lot of steps here. And one of the things that I notice most often with product owners and product marketing people, when you truly switch to Agile, there's like one complaint that always happens. You mean I got to work with the team every day? Like every day? Like, well, yeah, it's your product, right? People were used to, at OpenX, writing up a huge like PRD and then going away for a couple of months. So we were kind of what I would call Scrum fall. We were doing Scrum stand-ups, but it was like from a waterfall document, and the product owner was nowhere to be found. I mean, that's fascinating, isn't it? Like, how do you get that kind of hybrid approach? The other business objective of the transformation was actually understanding what our true capacity was. If you have 47 or 43 number one projects that you want to do, you don't understand, and with 22 different teams that are all busy, you don't understand your capacity. You really don't. You don't have a feel, and so the idea is just pile up the projects and something will get out there. You know, when you have people, an engineer working on 5 different projects, your productivity is 1/10 of working on one project, right? And everyone knows that, but obviously it has to be relearned. Finally, you want to reduce frustration on the team. Number one symptom of frustration is people leave, right? It turns off. People stop caring. They're just pulling tickets, doing whatever they say. They're not engaged in actually the product development and benefits for the business. Third big thing about an Agile transformation, there has to be clear ownership and accountability. Now, what do I mean by this? If everyone's busy and nothing's ever getting done, no one's accountable for anything, right? Hey, I'm working flat out, but I'm not accountable to a team because I'm on these 4 other teams. Or, hey, that's what they wanted to do. Why is it my fault there's no business benefit, right? So there's a variety of things that lead to this. One of which is role confusion. And my favorite is, I thought the CTO sets development priorities. That'd be nice, right? But if in programmatic advertising, which is the space that OpenX is in, maybe I'm new to it. Well, I do know everything, but maybe I don't know exactly everything about this business. So why would I set the priorities in a very complex marketplace? Right? But people assume that. People were confused about the process. It's like, hey, I just mentioned this, and all of a sudden it launched. Well, you wrote a story. You got in a sprint. Why would you be surprised about that? And then my favorite is accountability resistance. Like, process is just going to slow us down. And I hear this a lot from the engineers where this is too much overhead. Let's just do some stuff. And I'm like, well, there's 12 million lines of code in this platform. There's around 110 engineers. How do you know what you're doing isn't going to screw up something else? Oh, I don't care about that. Right? So there's no accountability. Fourth thing in order to get this stuff going is you really need an assessment. A top-down one, strategic, what does the business want to do, what are the business goals, and as well as a bottom-up one, more tactical. What are the tools that we're using, what are the approaches? Maurizio is going to talk about both assessments in a minute. Finally, just get moving. Like perfect is, the enemy of get it done. With one team of around 230 people, you can kind of figure stuff out and get it going. Let's say you had thousands of people, maybe 5 divisions worth of an organization. Well, start with one and just get it going. Figure out what you want to do, make the changes, and start moving. Because momentum is what's going to help the organizations. Anyway, so Maurizio is going to chat a little bit about the first 100 days journey here. So take it away.
Thanks, Mark. All right, so that's what we need. Those are the 5 steps you need. And when Paul started this process, he started it. I'm going to go over the roadmap that we followed. All right, so this was our roadmap. Paul joined OpenX in August 2017, and we started the strategic assessment with a fellow consultant. His name is Israel Gap. So Israel started that assessment in September 2017. Paul called us in to do the bottom-up assessment, the team assessment, in October 2017. Those team assessments continued on into November 2017. At that point in November 2017, we did a bunch of Agile refresher sessions. I'll get into that in a second. And then by December 2017, we finished off the Agile refreshers. We did a deep tool realignment. The tools were in pretty bad shape. And then in January 2018, everybody came back from vacation and we launched the new process. We rebooted the entire organization. So that was our 100 business days from September to December. That was our roadmap. So let me give you a little bit more what we did on the strategic assessments. Again, this was our fellow consultant that did it. So Paul wanted the top down. He wanted to get an independent consultant to come in and give an idea of what's happening in the organization. So the independent consultant looked at a number of things.
That looks like me.
He met with Paul to get his perspective on the organization and where he wanted to take OpenX. The consultant then met with the key team members, the other C players, the CEO, right, the CIO, the CFO, and so on, along with directors and some team members. So he got their perspective. They also did a tech debt analysis to check the quality of the code. So they did that as well. And finally, they tried to establish, well, what's the 1-year vision or 3-year vision for this organization? Where do we want to take it? So this was the focus of the strategic assessment that was done. So out of the assessment came a number of results, some key findings and recommendations that Israel made. And one of the findings he found was, well, everything was a priority. So we've heard about the 43 priority 1 projects. So it came out in the assessment, right? The other thing that came out was that the teams were playing Agile rather than being Agile. So it came out in the assessment. The tech debt analysis actually revealed that the level of tech debt was actually reasonable. What was interesting that was found was it was reasonable because the engineers were actually still doing refactoring code without telling the product owners. Because the product owners didn't care about it, they just wanted to get product out. But the engineers knew better. So deep down they kept it going. That's why it wasn't so bad. So that was actually a very interesting finding. And finally, we had a PMO that needed to do portfolio and program planning, and that was inadequate. So these were his key findings. The recommendations that were made were, well, put in place an architecture review board and a product council, right? So an upper management team that's going to look at these requests coming into engineering, and we'll triage the requests. And you can decide what these priorities are so we don't have 43 priority 1 projects. So that was his first recommendation. Secondly, he suggested using a WSJF method. So for people that know SAFE, you might know that term. So using a 1-pager process, it's basically you're putting in place an algorithm to prioritize your projects, right? And he left it up to OpenX to come up with that algorithm. Finally, he suggested portfolio Kanban in upper management. So actually set up a Kanban for upper management in Jira to actually see what the priorities of the projects were. So that was one of his other recommendations. He had 2 more. I will be posting the slides afterwards, by the way. Scrum and Kanban. So for some reason, there was a perception at OpenX that everybody had to do Scrum. So he suggested, well, no. People do Scrum or Kanban depending on their reality. And finally, he suggested using dynamic teams. So let me tell you what dynamic teams are. Now, you know it's a huge platform, right? So the product is the entire platform. So there is no nice little product that you can break up. That's the reality of OpenX. So the dynamic team is, well, you get an initiative coming from upper management. You put in place a team with all the right skills, It's a stable team that will work for X amount of time to deliver it, and then you tear down the team until the next initiative. So this is a concept of dynamic teams. Now, it sort of sounds like it goes against Agile because we all want stable teams, but that's not the OpenX reality, right? So these were his recommendations. Now that was the top-down view, but we want to make sure we have no gap with the bottom-up view, right? What are the teams thinking at this point? So we wanted to check that gap, and that's where the team assessments came in. So in the team assessments, what we did was we interviewed more than 50 people, started with the directors, managers, team leads, team members. We did one-on-ones, we did small group interviews. We listened to what the teams were saying. We wanted their feedback. We also conducted a survey, 31 questions on 6 different dimensions. The 6 dimensions that we focused on were Agile basics. Did people know the Agile values and the principles? Did they know epics and stories, and what were they? It sounds basic, but you'll see why it's not basic. The product ownership. Did we have product ownership in the organization? Were they available? Did the product owners have a backlog that was prioritized, was refined, right? What was the product ownership doing? What about the team roles and Agile skills? Were the roles clear? And you'll see in a second how the roles weren't clear in this organization. Were the teams thinking of building in quality rather than trying to test it in, right? Some of the things we were trying to get out of this assessment. Another dimension we looked at is the team and the processes. Was a Scrum Master assigned? Did they have one, right? Were they doing retrospectives, etc.? Release management was another dimension. Well, we have 22 teams on a release train. They're going every 2 weeks, they're going to production. Is there alignment between these teams that are delivering stuff in production, right? You got to be doing some level of release planning. So we wanted to know how that was being done. And finally, on quality, we wanted to know whether there were quality goals in the organization. Did we have some corporate quality goals? Did we have some team goals that they were setting? Were they setting sprint quality goal improvements, right? Which Scrum says you're supposed to do with every sprint. Finally, we attended a number of meetings where, as we were talking to the team members, where we felt we needed a little more insight, we actually attended their ceremonies to see what they were doing. So that's everything we did, and again, we came out with positive patterns and anti-patterns, just like with any assessment. And OpenX is no different than others. We had a bunch of great stuff that they came up with. Teamwork at OpenX was actually awesome. So the teams are actually working together very, very well. They were very self-organized. They knew what they were working on, right? They had focused on it. They were running that 2-week release train. It was actually pretty awesome to see how often they were delivering. They missed very few trains during the 2-week process. Now, what went into each train changed every 2 weeks, but they missed very few trains. And continuous integration was available, although it wasn't being used by everyone, but at least continuous integration was there. Now, like with any assessment, we found a bunch of stuff that could be improved. Now, I'm going to put up a list, and the list you're going to see is big. But I can guarantee you that I can go into any organization and I'll find the same issues. So these are opportunities. There are common anti-patterns out there. All right? I'm just going to focus on a few of them. I don't expect you to read this slide. So in our assessments, whenever we give recommendations, we always give it on 3 different pillars: people, process, and tools. That's the magic triad. And that's how we focused our recommendations. On the people side, we focused on role clarification and maturing Agile. So on the role clarification, we've talked about it, there seemed to be some confusion. So there was confusion between the 3 PMs and the PO. Sort of sounds like a joke. But what are the 3 PMs and the PO? Well, what's a project manager? What's a program manager? What's a product manager? And of course, Agile has introduced product owner, just to add to the confusion. So people weren't sure what all of these roles were doing in the teams. Then add to that, well, we have Scrum Master, and we have also the line manager wondering, well, what am I doing, right? And all of this confusion at OpenX was because people were playing multiple roles, right? They had no dedicated Scrum Masters. Even the product owner roles weren't clear. Sometimes we had, I knocked it down. Sometimes we had the managers playing the technical product owners. So people were confused as to what they had to do. So that's where some of that confusion came in the roles. So what we did was we set up Agile refresher sessions. We set up a half-a-day refresher because they had launched Agile before, So we wanted to just do refresher sessions. Half a day for people that knew Scrum and Kanban, a full day for people that needed more. We did a Scrum Master half a day refresher, Product Owner half a day, and the best session I think we did was the Being an Agile Manager half a day. So I call that the therapy session for managers, because in Agile everybody feels, well, you got to fire the managers, what are we going to do with them? But there's still a purpose for them, and I encourage you, if you need to work with your managers, to hold this kind of a session. It's actually an awesome half a day session, right? So those are the 5 sessions we did, and our goal was really just to focus on getting back to the basics, fix the misconceptions about Agile in the organization, making sure that everyone had the same foundation, and making sure that the roles were clear. So that's what we did on the people side. Those were the recommendations we did. One of the other things we focused on is who owns quality. That's the magic in Agile that comes up all the time. So, and at OpenX, we found the same thing. We found the wall between Dev and QA. And it existed there as well. And some teams actually was pretty awesome. Because again, we had 22 teams we were looking at. Some of them, the devs and QA, were like 2 peas in a pod. And yet in another one, you could see it. It was like this massive wall between them. So we asked ourselves, well, how can we get this better at OpenX? How can we get Dev and QA to think together and think that they both own quality? That was our big question. So we made a number of recommendations. The top 3 we did was getting the QA director to be the advocate of who owns quality. She was already an advocate before this process started. She continued doing that, and we encouraged her to be that advocate to say everyone owns quality, right? We also said that they had to promote the implementation of a DevOps culture, not hiring someone and putting them in a DevOps position. That's not a DevOps culture. DevOps culture is where the entire team is thinking of how we're building in quality, doing automation, running these tests on a continuous integration basis, right? That's the culture. So that has to be part of everyone in the team. And the third recommendation was holding a QA event. I've been in QA for a while, some of you know me. QA seems to be this thing where people sort of know they need it, but they try to not understand it. And I think with Agile, it sort of continued. So we sort of recommended hold a QA education event. Bring in the product owners, bring in the Scrum Master, bring in even upper management. Paul knows what it is, but some other upper management sometimes don't know. And hold this QA education event where the devs and QA are showing how they're building in quality. And you educate the organization on QA. So that's what we did on the people side. On the process side, we're going to focus on a couple of key anti-patterns that we see out there. So one of the most famous ones I like is the backlog cleanup. And this is the most common anti-pattern you'll see out there. You walk into an organization, you go to their Jira board and you look at their backlog, and they have hundreds of issues. And you look at them and you say, how come you have so many issues in your backlog? Well, we have some bugs in there that came up 2 years ago. We may fix it. Well, guess what? If you haven't looked at it in 2 years, it's one of 2 things. You're never going to do it, or it's really not a bug. And it really doesn't matter if it is a bug. So you got to clean it up, right? So with OpenX, same thing. We found a bunch of teams that had things that were even older than 2 years. So we made a recommendation to do what's called a blind close. You pick a date, you draw it in the sand, and you say, anything older than this date, we're going to do a bulk close and get rid of it. Get rid of that noise out of the backlog so the teams can actually get to the features they need to deliver, right? So in their case, we recommended 1 year. Some teams took us to task and went 6 months. Some even went to 3 months and closed anything older. So if you're adventurous and your teams are adventurous, you can do these bulk closes. And guess what? If the bug comes up, it'll come up again. You just reopen a new bug. It's really not a problem, right? One of the other anti-patterns we tried to fix was, what's an epic? So now you're saying, well, that's pretty basic. It's an epic. So what's an epic? So scaling Agile has really confused this definition. The basic epic definition is it's a large story. And if you listen to Mike Cohen, a story is a story is a story, right? And an epic is just a story that doesn't fit in a sprint. That was the basic epic definition. With scaling Agile and safe, it started to bring in the portfolio epic and the enabler epic. So everyone's confused. So at OpenX, we encountered it in a little bit of a different flavor. They were using epics to manage projects. So they had in Jira an epic that was a project and an epic that was a Scrum epic. So we had this confusion going on. So again, we brought it back to the basics and said, an epic is a story that doesn't fit in one sprint. And we introduced a new issue type called a PMO project so that the PMO can manage their project. So we broke that connection to the epic. Now this confusion in the definition of an epic perpetuated itself into a story. So now I had a bunch of stories that looked like epics that kept going from sprint to sprint to sprint, never finished, right? So again, we took the definition of a story back and said, story is something you got to finish in a sprint. It's got to be developed and tested in a sprint. And basically, we were really just trying to get the teams to focus, right? Finish a story in the sprint and get it out and get it done. And stop starting stuff and start finishing stuff. That's what we were trying to get to them, right? So that's what we did.
Maurizio, we had both extremes here. Some stories were too large and should have been epics. And then some stories were very low-level work tasks.
Yeah.
Right, so that's part of the what is a story and the lack of, Agile doesn't mean consistency, but if you don't know what Agile is, you should start at the basics. That's kind of what we're saying.
Yeah. Thanks, Paul. All right, the other recommendation we made was introduce what we call the process and tools team. So I like to use this in different organizations. It's a very small team. And this team will own process and tools, and you'll see why it's important in a second. You might already have it, right? So this process and tools team, I like to call them the mechanics of the triad, right? The people, the process, and the tools. They're the people that are going to keep an eye on your tools. They're not just defining the configuration of your Jira system. They're not the guys that are going to sit and go add a custom field to your screens. It's not who I'm talking about, right? These people can not only just do the Jira configuration or Confluence or whatever tool you may have, but they're also keeping an eye on the process. So when a team comes to you and says, I want to change my workflow. Why do you want to change your workflow? Well, because I don't like it. And have these discussions, because in those discussions, you'll see if a team is struggling with their process, right? And you can actually help them with some coaching and say, okay, let's take it back to the basics. What's happening in this team? Maybe you have new team members that need training. So this team actually becomes the focal point of any process issues in your organization, right? Now, it's a small team, so I don't think you should be hiring a bunch of people and putting them in this team. That's not the point. And really, I think the Agile coaches and the Scrum Masters are actually an extension of this team. And you can start it as a community of practice or as a COP, as we call it, and really get the Agile coaches and Scrum Masters to work with this little central team so that you keep the process flowing, so that you keep things running, right? So that's on the process side. On the tools side, so the context of OpenX, 22 teams, mostly software, some operational, a bunch of projects, software mostly, and then we had a PMO that required portfolio management. So when we did this deep dive into the tool configuration, we always look at the tool configuration of an organization on a spectrum. And I like to call this the tool configuration spectrum, where on the left you have use the tool out of the box, you don't touch it, you don't change it very little. And on the other extreme, you have why did you buy a packaged software? You've changed it so much or you've configured it so much there's no point in using the packaged software. And OpenX sort of fell a little bit to the right of that. So they didn't have an extreme configuration. I've seen some pretty bad tool configurations out there. But they had done a lot of extra configuration that wasn't required, right? This configuration was actually causing some of the common anti-patterns, right? The tools being misused, right? And the tools not optimally configured to help the teams. So it was affecting how the team's effectiveness, how they were working. So if you have tools that are improperly configured or badly configured, it is going to affect your teams. How is it affecting the teams? So, for example, the teams were told that the tools couldn't do something. They were just told, yeah, I can't do that, because the people owning the tools didn't want to bother with the configuration or didn't have time, right? So they didn't want to help them, right? So that's what happens when you don't have a focused process and tools team, right? So I've never shown the potential of the tools. When we went in and started to show them the potential of what some of these tools did, like Jira and Confluence, they said, oh, we didn't know it could do that. We had asked questions, but nobody told us. So that was some of the things that we brought to the table. And then people in the teams, as they joined the teams, because there was no one helping them or coaching them on the tools, they just, well, this is what I used to do at the other company, so I'm going to start doing it here, which is great. But guess what? You're trying to do portfolio reporting. So now if everybody's doing their own flavor of things in Jira, you're not going to get the same level of reporting. Pretty hard to do portfolio reporting if everyone's doing their own way of working, right? So this is how it was affecting the team. So what we did was we did a deep intervention, as I mentioned. We then also encouraged the uses of the wiki with Jira, so Confluence and wiki together, working hand in hand. And we actually replaced their homegrown service desk with a more modern service desk like Jira Service Desk. So that's what we recommended. On the portfolio side, what we did, so again, portfolio management is a funny business, and people expect tools to fix it all for them. And whenever you look at people doing portfolio management, I'm amazed at how many, I like to call it calisthenics, that they pull to pull numbers and reports and to show how this portfolio is being managed. But then they'll turn around to myself, the consultant, and say, give me a tool where I can press a button and it's going to show me everything. There's no tool out there that's going to do that for you, right? You spend 5 days pulling together your portfolio report, and you're going to want me to program it into one tool that I press a button. So you got to be a little bit reasonable. So what we found at OpenX, again, the move from projects to products in OpenX's case is actually very difficult because they have this humongous system, right? So their reality is they're driving more projects in there. But they were using a tool that was overly complex for what they needed. So what we did was pull out the tool that they were using and we put in place a simpler tool. We suggested they go with Portfolio for Jira, something simpler than what they were using, okay? So we told them to start simple, get the basics of portfolio management going, get the reporting at a certain basic level, and then we'll look beyond it, right? But do expect to do some data manipulation. So that's pretty much everything we did from an assessment and consultant point of view.
Wow, that's a lot. I'm tired.
And that was September to December, right? So now Paul's going to tell us what's happened since January when we started.
Maurizio and I were talking this morning, and I'm like, hold on, was this 2017 we did all this? No, it was 2018. So it's been a very relatively fast journey. Let's talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly. Come on, Sergio Leone. Nobody likes the spaghetti westerns. Come on. So the good, everyone loves puppies and kittens. Let's give it up for puppies and kittens. Thank you very much. We actually completed in the first 7 months of this process 28 different projects, from inception to completion to GA. In the previous year, it was 12 for the whole year. Okay. Now, a project's not a project, not a project, not a project. Some of these were actually quite large. Okay. And merely because we were using tools effectively and planning better, and like not having somebody work on 9 things, you're actually able to accomplish stuff. It's a miracle. We had prioritization because when we created this process that Maurizio chatted about where if you wanted, there's strategic imperatives for the company, you want to do something, basically fund something, you write a one-pager, you do a value to cost ratio, and we try to do the shortest, biggest bang for the buck sort of algorithm. And so we did that, and that's what we started funding, quote-unquote funding, meaning staffing. Okay? And so that actually worked. People were using Scrum and Kanban, mainly tech ops projects, because remember, we have our own infrastructure, so there's a lot of stuff going on there. Where Kanban, most of the software development projects were Scrum. We didn't launch a team until we had everyone on the team that was required to finish the project. Sounds simple, right? But if there's going to be a lot of like big data stuff in a project and there's nobody from that team on the project, it's not going to complete, right? I mean, that's like 101, right? But it's like we didn't start it until we had everyone, right? And if we came up to a priority project and we couldn't staff it, we go to the next one, right? And then staff that one. And so that was earth-shattering. It's like you staff it, you work on it, it launches, right? Oops. I didn't want to go to the bad quite yet. All teams had Scrum Masters, full-time Scrum Masters. Now, we didn't have enough Scrum Masters, so the Scrum Masters might have 2 to 3 to 4 projects, but it wasn't a manager, it wasn't a random engineer this sprint, it was a Scrum Master. Huge improvement. The bad. The project portfolio, the backlog, we staffed a whole bunch of projects. We're fully committed, but the backlog kept growing. People were submitting stuff, oh, I want to do this next, and I want to do this next. I'm like, hold on, you see the release plan, right? Things aren't really going to be shaken out till like April, May for some of these projects. And this is like February, right? And so monotonically, the backlog, the portfolio backlog just increased, okay? We actually came up with phases, like if you're going to release something in bits, there should be some value to it. So we ended up launching stuff, iteratively that didn't actually have any value attainment. And then frankly, people really resisted any form of value for the project. Meaning like, is this going to make us more money? Is it going to save costs? Whatever. People just like, well, I don't know. Okay, and I was so excited to get the whole damn thing running that it's like, all right, whatever, let's keep going, right? And so, what we learned in the course of the first 6 to 7 months of this was, you really got to look at that because then all of a sudden 28 things get done and it doesn't have a hell of a lot of business impact. And I'm happy things got done and finished, but not necessarily good for the business. Staffing, this was a huge problem because these line managers and the dynamic projects didn't click at first. So the line manager's like, oh, I've got an IR over here. I'm just pulling some people off a team. And they go work on it for a week. I'm like, well, you can't do that. Why are you doing that? You just stop this project. Okay, and context switching. And the ugly, everyone loves ugly dolls, right? We actually discovered, we finished something, code complete, it's live, and the go-to-market people are like, what? You really hit that release date? Oh shit, we're not ready. Yeah, so we had something that launched that was done, ready to go in April, and the first customer was on it in July. Huh? Lesson learned. What's your go-to-market plan? Hey, we're expending resources. Like, where's your go-to-market plan? How does that get in the marketplace? That was amazing. Prioritization, as I said, it was pretty hard. We had a relatively complicated, we have objectives and initiatives, and then that'll lead to like, we do projects for that initiative. The minute we started, that all went to hell. And it was who yelled loudest, right? So that's a corporate problem. That's not necessarily a process problem or a product development lifecycle problem or a software development lifecycle problem. Actually sticking to what you state your priorities are. Once again, easy. And staffing, I talked a little bit about moving resources around. So quality, as Maurizio indicated, it's always a journey, okay? And so we've got some good culture change, the wall is coming down, DevOps is starting to emerge, but the biggest arguments we had with the new process is, well, we're not putting a status in there which is ready for QA. The minute you put a status in there, it's called ready for QA, your dev's not working with QA. That's the classic, throw it over the wall.
And
right?
We fought that. We didn't
put it in. I'm like, they should, hey, they sit next to you. Turn around and say, hey, this story's ready. Why don't we talk about how to test it? I mean, what the hell? Or if I were still living here, I'd go, tabarnak. The tools. We optimize for what we're doing. We actually, the simpler portfolio management kind of worked. The service desk launch was awesome. As if you can tell, we're kind of using Atlassian for the full suite. Okay, and tools are tools, right? You can have a crappy tool and have an incredible use of it, or the best, most powerful tools in the world, and you don't know what to do with it, right? But we actually, had some huge success on the tools. So what are the key takeaways here? Transformation is hard, okay? People cling to broken processes. They'll all complain, it's not working, we're not getting anything out the door, whatever. Okay, so what? No! Can't change it. I'm comfortable with the broken nature of my reality. Right? Who's moved my cheese? Right? So I got around 50 copies. I mean, it's like 30 pages long. It's not that long. And everyone was like the mouse going through the same thing where the cheese isn't and expecting it to be different. Right? No, we're gonna have to change this, okay? And to make it better. And it requires a huge amount of constant effort. It's like a land war in Asia. The minute you stop insisting on it, everything just slides back. Okay? It starts from the top. Well, the fish rots from the head, right? So if the executives don't get it, I mean, they're kind of bored. They were excited every week when they got to change priorities and move teams around and whatever. Wow, that feels like we're working, right? That's work. Well, no, here's the Kanban board. You really can't see it, but here's the executive Kanban board. Ooh, look, there's the completed. Ooh, lots of completed things. Hey, you wanna do this one over here? All right, what are we stopping? We're fully committed. Oh, you mean I have to stop something to start something? I mean, it's an okay thing to do, right? It's agile. You do agile because the environment is changing fast, right? So it may change really fast, and you may have to reprioritize on the fly. But your executives actually have to buy in here. Start with the basics. Everyone, like, Agile, an anti-pattern Agile, fully mature Agile is everyone's doing the exact same thing, right? That's not what we're saying here. If you don't understand what a story is, right? If you don't understand the basics, you don't get to like opt into stuff and start modifying it. It's the shu-ha-ri stuff, right? Everyone hear that before? The karate stuff? All right, so start with the basics so everyone's on the same page. How would we do this a little bit differently? So because remember I said accountability was such a huge problem, the corollary to that is nobody wants metrics, right? Well, hold on a sec. You're tracking our velocity over the sprint, and it should be going up. Velocity over sprint should probably go what? Up? Right? Cool. Wow, I guess we should work harder. All right. Oh, what about QA? Hey, we're tracking escape rate now. We didn't do it at first. Now we are, right? Because escape rate is a wonderful metric that just makes people pay attention. And escape rate through the entire process. Because it's not like we want to get better like instantly, but I want to know what our escape rate today is versus 12 months ago. All right? Because that's an investment that we may need to have. So everyone know what the Hawthorne effect is? Western Electric, which used to make the teletype machines, they had a Hawthorne plant. And so a bunch of scientific management, Frederick Taylor and all that stuff, they came in and started measuring stuff. Just when they started measuring stuff, the productivity went way up. You measure something, it gets better, right? It's kind of human nature. Staffing consistency, keeping people on teams so we can actually attain the team. Real value estimation before we start something. Is it going to make me $1 million, $2 million, whatever? Groom the backlog. Make sure the go-to-market people know we're going to be releasing something. Get them involved, and frankly, they should be involved early on, in fact, in the beginning. And then kind of build more of the DevOps culture. The other thing I would do is, I kicked off another project at OpenX. Remember I said we're 20,000 servers on-prem, 5 minutes? We're moving the entire infrastructure to the cloud. Just signed a huge contract, a very high volume. Everyone says the cloud is 4 times more expensive. At the volumes that we're using, it's cheaper. You're subscale on-prem with 20,000 servers and 5 colos. So what's the benefit of the cloud? It's going to lift up it's already lifting up all the rocks. Things that are broken, things that need to be fixed, tech debt that needs to be reprioritized. So maybe if I had started that journey, would have rationalized the platform a little better.